can pass stuff out in the meantime, it's fine. But. Good evening and welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for March 4th, 2019. Can we have the roll, please?
Tyler Robinson.
Here.
Greg Strike.
Here.
Danielle Bailey.
Here.
Andre Spinelli.
Here.
Seth Anderson.
Here.
Brian Looney.
Here.
Jared Gardner.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Strike, you have a...
Just a matter of record keeping here to reorder the agenda.
So motion to reorder.
Reorder the agenda.
And in which way?
On the annual election of officers, C2, move that to the end of the meeting.
Okay, there's a motion from Mr. Strike. Can I have a second? Any objection to that reordering of the agenda? Hearing none, the election of officers will take place at the end of the meeting. We have the minutes for Monday, January 14th, 2019. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Thank you, Ms. Bailey, seconded by Mr. Gardner. Any discussion on those minutes? Hearing none, those minutes are approved. C1 disclosure, special order of business, going down the line. Mr. Gardner.
No disclosures.
Mr. Looney.
No disclosures.
Mr. Strike.
No disclosures.
Ms. Bailey.
I am helping to organize a solarized project in Turnagain. However, it is as a volunteer position, and I have no stake in that matter.
Any questions for Ms. Bailey's disclosure? As a legislative item, I think we are good to go without a motion, but thank you for that disclosure. Mr. Spinelli?
Yeah, I'd like to disclose that I've been involved with several meetings with the municipal staff as well as the Anchorage Homebuilders Association regarding the R2 case tonight, 2019-0009. I don't believe I have any. I also build in the R2M and live in R2. Those are my disclosures.
To get further into those issues, do you have a substantial financial interest or substantial private interest in the matter now before the body?
No.
And to the extent that this is something that you need to disclose, does it regard a large part of the action that we'll be discussing today?
Does what?
You mentioned your role in the meetings and your job and living there.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how to answer that.
I guess my question would be, is it one that varies? Is it more of a general, or is there a direct interest or a direct?
General interest.
Okay. And then would it vary directly or substantially with the outcome of today's decisions?
No.
Okay. Do you have a significant monetary interest?
No.
And is your interest one that is generally possessed by a large group?
Yes.
Okay, and not by you in particular?
I mean, other than I live in R2, but I guess lots of people live in R2, so.
Okay.
I'm going to go to Mr. Strike first, and then I'll ask for a motion.
Yes, I have a follow-on question to the chair, and this is to Mr. Spinelli. Was any of your interaction with the municipal personnel in any way, shape, or form intended to influence how wording would be directed for this case before us tonight? Was there any method of influence that you were trying to convey to them?
I've submitted comments and I've told them what I think about the code and how I would apply it to proposed projects in the future. So that's what I've done. Exactly what you would expect me to do, I guess.
I think
it's that form of influence and the giving your opinion and so forth into a matter now before the commission is what I have the concern with.
Yep, I think the way that I would look at, I'd remind the commission, and I really appreciate Mr. Spinelli's voicing this disclosure. I read his comments in the packet, right? But And I'm going to have a similar disclosure, but here's what I would say. Ours is a recommendation to the Assembly. It's not a specific case. It affects the municipality and zoning code broadly. And we are appointed here to represent a variety of viewpoints and sort of knowledge pieces within the municipality of Anchorage. And I believe we're well served to have someone with knowledge of the building community. I would simply ask Mr. Spinelli, over the course of the deliberations, that you be upfront and honest as you look at specific, areas. And I think what the conflict is getting at is if there are provisions that could either be taken away or put on that would enrich you personally, that's where the conflict rises. But your knowledge and your overall involvement and development, to me, in this instance, is not a conflict per se.
And with that clarification and going on the record with that statement, I'm fine with that.
Very good. Thank you. I still would like a motion to direct Mr. Spinelli to participate. Thank you, Mr. Strike. Can we get a second? I'll ask members to vote, please. You are directed to participate. Seth?
None.
And I'll make the same disclosure, and that is that my organization, Cook Inlet Housing Authority, has developed within the R2M and currently owns vacant land within the R2M with an intent to develop. Any questions?
I would just propose the same question that we raised to Commissioner Spinelli, that if there are issues that wording would change, that it would directly benefit you, that you disclose that as we approach those. But that since it is a general amendment that affects the entire district, that I would move to direct you to participate. Call for question, for vote.
All right, there we go. I will hang out and participate. Next up, we have no items on the consent agenda. We have one item on the regular agenda. It is not a public hearing item. It's a review and recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission for the Anchorage School District 6-year capital improvement plan, 2019 through 2025. And I think we're just going to go straight to school. Or are we going to hear from Tom? Can we get a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is case 2019-0044, Anchorage School District 6-year capital improvement plan, 2019 through 2025. Planning and Zoning Commission is being asked to make its annual review and recommendations to the Anchorage Assembly regarding the annual ASD CIP. The Commission's recommendations will be forwarded to the Assembly. The Assembly is scheduled to deliberate on March 19, 2019, and they do need to do that then in order for meet the legal requirement for for getting the approvals and getting it submitted 90 days before the end of the school year. The attached CIP has been provided to you, a memorandum from the planning department. It's F5A, and also a memorandum dated February 22nd, 2019 from the Anchorage School District. ASD capital planning and construction has also been provided, and Tom Fenosef, the manager of that division, is here to address this item. This is a non-public hearing item, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So just to clarify, would you, following whatever we end up doing with the recommendation, would you like us to move the resolution that you've passed out, or is there time to get that for us next Monday?
Next Monday would be fine, and that draft resolution is there for you to use, amend, work with.
Okay, but we'll not worry about getting the wording of the resolution here this evening. Very good. Okay, thank you. Mr. Fenisef, you're up.
All right, good evening. My name is Tom Fenisef. I'm the Senior Director for Capital Plan and Construction for the Anchorage School District. And basically, I'm here to answer your questions about the CIP. I can also point out some highlights, some new things that you'll see in the CIP. First of all, in year 5, which is 2023, on the actual CIP, there's some highlighting there. And that's to show you that we're looking to do a multi-year bond, a 2-year bond. So you see in year 6, there's no numbers in there because we're going to try to take advantage of that multi-year bond. Most of the, you'll see a lot of our deferred requirements include roofs. We have a number of roofs that are failing and in need of replacement. Also on there is prioritized security projects. As you're well aware of, security is and recently has been a top priority in looking at new ways to make sure we're building safer schools. So that includes secure entryways, vestibules with keyless access, more cameras, better positive identification, and more control in who we let into buildings. And then also, there's an item there for $4 million, which the Assembly approved to add on, and that's for earthquake recovery for Eagle River and Chuyak area schools. So that's a quick overview of the CIP, pending your questions.
A couple questions on the Western Demographics Report.
Sure.
I don't believe that there's any of the Sand Lake parcels that are proposed to be developed during this time frame. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, but when I look at the utilizations, they're starting to get above 100%, Sand Lake 122%. I mean, really, when I look at it, there's clearly some spots in South Anchorage where there's some higher utilization. What does that utilization rate have to be at to trigger the new schools?
There's no specific number for that. That's kind of based on the instructional side because they can adjust that with staffing. We can bring in relocatables to address the issue. So there's no really specific number in which we say, oh, we got to build a new school. Many times we'll look at other options before building a new school. But given our current projections, there's been a gradual decline in enrollment. So we're projecting across the district those numbers going down. So, we're closing schools right now. Mount Spurs is scheduled to be closed for next academic year.
Very good. So that was going to be my next question. Obviously, when we look on the other end of that spectrum, clearly you've addressed the ones on base. As we start to see schools in the 60% utilization and 70%, at what point should we start? What point do you and your facility management start thinking about taking a school offline?
Well, we tend to look at schools in terms of groups because a lot of times we're looking for that, will rebounding solve the problem without having to be a new school? That's generally less expensive. We also look at changing the structure of our schools to suit the needs of the population. So that may be looking at a junior high or a middle school that's currently a 7 and 8 and looking at a 6 through 8 option. So there are a number of things that both I look at it from a facility standpoint and then also our educators look at from how can we make the program fit.
Very good, and I'll go to other commissioners in a second. Last question: on the handout that you gave for the roughly, a little over $59 million school bond proposal, the $7.53 per $100,000 of assessed property valuation, is that with or without state revenue sharing or state repayment of bond?
That's without. So that's That's just straight numbers on how much it would cost. So given your average home value about 363, it's about $28 for the average home in district. But that's also a worst case scenario in terms of if we sold that bond right off the bat in 1 year. That, to my knowledge, has never happened. Normally it's least that's spread over 3 to 5 years and sometimes up to 20 years.
Very good. I see Mr. Strike in the queue. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. 2 years ago, we had a presentation from the school, from your group, identifying a new methodology for estimating attendance for the following years. How is that new methodology working over the past 2 years?
Well, I wasn't here 2 years ago. I know the education department has a system to do that. But my department looks at seeing where the population is going. We work very closely with Tom Davis and his crew and figuring out how the population is developing there. But in terms of your question is...
There was a new methodology identified by the school district specifically to address the identification of future attendance, that the methodology that they were using up to that point was being discarded as it was not being viewed as reliable. That first year, the new system was put into place. Apparently, it met with abysmal failure the first year. How did it translate the second year? Because so far, we've not done a good job estimating what our attendance is going to be from 1 year to the next.
So we've seen a decrease in that number. Is what it was 2 years ago?
Are you meeting your forecast? You're forecasting what attendance will be, then the attendance actually comes out. Did you meet it, beat it? Is it acceptable?
Yes, within the limits that Northern Economics, which is the company that we've used, that uses a number of different factors to develop their enrollment projections.
Under the CIP, you've got a number of roof replacements continue to be a major task. The current life of these 5 schools that you've identified, any estimate of what the current age of those roofs are?
They vary because they've been different pieces have been replaced over time, but most of those roofs are between 20 and 30 years old. The majority of them.
I've done millions of square feet of roofs on prisons, hotels, hospitals, schools. And, today's technology is expanding the life expectancy of many of these roofs, such that we're having to have issued through the manufacturers 25-year plus warranties. Are you seeing that in your construction offerings? Is that a requirement? Are you moving to that type of end? I'm looking at it from a taxpayer, continually to repair roofs, where the commercial industry out there doesn't seem to have the same problem with roofs as the school district seems to have.
Well, the answer is absolutely. Many of our roofs use an inverted roof membrane assembly, which does not do well in Alaska from what we're seeing on these older roofs. All the new roofs that we're putting on use your classic EPDM layer, tapered insulation, better drainage. We're going from what used to be a 60 millimeter layer to a 90 millimeter layer. So yes, we are going to the modern standards for roofing. The problem is we have so many old roofs constructed of that inverted roof membrane assembly that it is causing problems, and they are not making their life expectancy.
I think from a marketing standpoint to the taxpayers, I think the ability to show that you are progressing into using more commercial means and methods to enhance and repair these roofs might come beneficial to you. Otherwise, you appear to be throwing good money after bad money year after year after year. I think we need to change our marketing a little bit on how we sell this. Take some, no offense, take some responsibility here and promote this. Promote yourself. That otherwise, from a taxpayer, I'm tired of throwing good money after bad with you guys. Tell me you're doing something different.
I'd agree with you, and I'd just refer you to the handouts that I passed out. And that's probably one of the things we can add in there is what these new roofs are made of, because we're using state-of-the-art roofing technology.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strike and Mr. Fenisev. Any other questions for the school district relating to CIP? All right, I will take a motion to recommend to the Assembly the approval of the Anchorage School District 6-year capital improvement plan. Ms. Bailey.
In the matter of case number 2019-0044, I move that we approve the Anchorage School District 6-year capital improvement plan analysis and recommendations based on the, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey, seconded by Mr. Looney. Any additional findings other than what are encompassed in the resolution?
No, I would just like us to adopt the findings encompassed in the staff provided resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. Anything else to add?
No more comments. Actually, so I think we heard a previous presentation, and really I think the most significant change, I think, from a previous information was the $4 million earthquake recovery, which was discussed. And generally, I would say that this proposed plan is mostly just take care of what they have. There's really not a whole lot. There's no new facilities. It's really kind of like what they were describing at that time. It's bare bones. Fix what we have. Just maintain, but don't let things fall apart. Kind of thing. That's what I see here still.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. Mr. Strike, you still in there, or is that from before? Okay. Mr. Anderson.
I'd just like to add that since the Western Demographics Report came out, that's been a good resource for us to compare the 6-year budgets versus compared to that report that they put together. And since that came out about a year ago, the budgets seem to align with what that report has been recommending. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll call a question. Please vote on the motion to adopt the CIP. That is approved. Thank you, sir. We'll get to our resolution next week. So next up is our public hearing item for the evening, case 2019-9. This is an amendment to the building bulk regulations in the R2A, R2D, and R2M zoning districts in order to replace the 2.5-story structure height limit in R2 zoning districts with more flexible standards for promoting compatible scale infill housing. Some of you that were here earlier heard a work session that we had on this item. At this point, we'll go to a staff report, and then following some questions that we might have, the staff will open up for public hearing. I'll do it when we do it. Go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is case 2019-0009, compatible scale infill housing R2 zones project. This is a text amendment to the Title 21 zoning ordinance. Its purpose is a target amendment to the bulk height regulations to replace a 2.5-story limit with a floor area ratio limit along with accompanying mitigating standards to address 3-story tall buildings. The public process for this case meets the procedural requirements for the review and approval of text amendments. Pages 7 and 8 of the Exhibit A staff report document that public process. The public hearing draft was released on December 10th for the public review period that ends this evening. And Exhibit E in the packet documents public comments received on a previous draft, the public hearing draft. Exhibit E2 is specifically comments received on the public hearing draft. You have seen laid on the table tonight an Exhibit E3. E3 provides you with comments that the department received as of about 4 p.m. today, approximately. Also laid on the table tonight is Exhibit C. At the chair's request, a draft Planning and Zoning Commission resolution is prepared for the Commission's consideration. It is only a starting draft, and it's there for the Commission to edit or change as it deems necessary as it listens to public testimony. Also laid on the table is an Appendix A2, recently completed site tests. Appendix A2 is an appendix to the Exhibit A staff report. Again, there's an adopting ordinance. It's 1 to 2 pages. An Exhibit A staff report that explains the amendments. Exhibit B contains the language of the text amendments. Exhibit C, laid on the table, is the draft resolution. And D, E, and F are supporting materials, informational. Exhibit F, the last exhibit, is an issue response. It's a table, 8 by 14. The issue response table responded to substantial public comments we received on the previous draft, a community discussion draft. I think we've mentioned that the Commission may use Exhibit F to organize its deliberations or as a reference for certain issues. The Commission may also request the planning staff to, update Exhibit F in order to address any recent written comments about the public hearing draft or testimony. It's there available as a tool or reference. There are two pieces that are not laid on the table but have been placed on the website and we mentioned or we emailed to the Commission. One is Appendix A1 to the staff report, and it provides the floor area ratio information for all built housing in the R2 zones. Of course, there's Appendix A2 site tests laid on the table, and then lastly, Appendix A3, a series of solar access tests that the department prepared in response to public comment. At the request of the Commission, just briefly, we were going to cover an issue with the solar access. So one of the concerns that we heard about moving away from a 2.5-story height limit to a floor area ratio limit was the possibility of allowing a full 3-story building, basically box-shaped with a flat roof, up against neighboring lots. And so whereas before you had a 2.5-story building with a pitched roof, now you have a box that's full 3 stories. And even though that box, its overall size limit for the bulk of the box is actually less than under current code, it can be taller so that it can shadow parts of the neighboring lots more so than a 2.5-story building. The Appendix A3 and the Appendix A2 tests indicate to us that the proposed amendments in total, they increase the minimum level of sunlight access protection for neighboring lots overall. So this is because the maximum allowed size bulk of the building on the lot is actually less than under current code. If a building is allowed to get taller, as it gets taller, it's required to cover less of the lot. Secondly, the solar access step back proposed in the draft ordinance recreates an equivalent level of sunlight access protection for residences on a neighboring lot as under the current 2.5-story standard. But the solar access protection is more consistent and predictable. The 2.5-story standard, current standard, requires buildings to be no more than 2 full stories, and then the 3rd story is in an attic type space. It does not limit the actual height of those stories. Ceiling heights does not limit the height of the pitch roof. The recommended standard, the solar access step back, recreates an equivalent amount of solar access step back as existed under the 2.5-story height limit at the building setback from its neighbor. The building can rise only 22 feet up to the top plate of its wall, and then it will need to stay under a solar access angle that inclines, as we've recommended in the staff report, at an incline of 8 to 12 roof pitch. So this creates an equivalent amount of solar access protection that on a standard 50-foot wide lot, if you're building a home, detached home or a duplex, it's essentially making that home or duplex adhere to that solar access step back and not be a 3-story building up to the setback. Third and last, in site testing for multifamily buildings on lots larger than 7,000 square feet, where multifamily buildings are already currently allowed and will continue to be allowed, we found that in the site testing in Appendix A1 that the primary effect of the solar access step back was that it shifted the designer's choice in the building placement on the site. So it made our site tester think about where they placed the multifamily building as compared to under the current code. And in the staff report on page 33, in the top, illustration on page 3, it shows how the concept of the designer shifting the bulk of the building away from the neighbor and placing other site features in between their building and the neighboring lot line. In other words, it actually encourages the builder to think about and shift their building, their big building, further away, unlike the current code. So for these 3 reasons, we believe that the solar access step back creates kind of an improved version of the existing 2.5-story standard with respect to solar access. The recommended standards meet the approval criteria in the Title 21 for the approval of text amendments. We believe that it advances the policies to promote housing, infill, and redevelopment. We believe that it improves the flexibility and ability of new construction to build the full number of housing units allowed by the district on the lot, while also advancing Goal 7 of Anchorage 2040 to ensure that new development is compatible with the neighborhood character and its neighborhood context. Page 35 of the staff report identifies some recommended edits to the public hearing draft. These arose from comments we received, the results of site testing, and other review. These are language edits that we believe improve the ordinance, and the draft resolution that we have provided refers to those edits as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there questions of staff before we go to public hearing? Mr. Strike, then Mr. Anderson.
Something that came to mind earlier in your initial review and our presentation and right now, as the lots are the same size, we're increasing the footprint typically on the infill of the larger buildings. What are we doing with we create a parking issue as we go up, as we get bigger. We're putting in garages. We're elevating the size of the buildings. We're creating more stormwater runoff and less ability for snow removal. There's no storage on these lots then for snow removal. Are these just unintended consequences?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Strike. Through the chair, as the diagrams on pages 18 and 19 and 20 depict, this ordinance actually results in a reduction of the maximum building bulk, and for multi-stories buildings, 2- and 3-story buildings, a reduction in their footprint allowed on the lot as compared to the current code. This ordinance and site testing indicates there's no increase in parking or the number of allowed units as compared to current code. These are problems in terms of current trends towards larger units, current trends towards bigger buildings, and parking requirements and other site requirements that increase the impervious surface. This ordinance, we believe, as someone can look at those pages 18, 19, 20 diagrams, the green building, the second to the left, is the maximum proposed to be allowed size. And in the fourth building from the left and towards the right is the current allowed max size. And the amount of footprint coverage of the lot, the total size of the building is less.
Well, I live in South Anchorage, not South Anchorage, down in Bootleggers Cove, and I drive by some of these units like this every day, and the old version and the new versions, the new ones that have just gone up in the last year and a half, they have no place to put their snow. The old units do. They've got their existing outside parking, and yes, this parking gets a little tighter. But the ones with garages, with the driveways, it's being put out in the street. So as far as the size of the footprint and so forth of the building, it is having an impact. Now, whether that's a code violation and becomes a code issue, one of the unintended consequences is the cost. These homeowners associations for these new units aren't prepared to haul away their snow after every snowfall. They just aren't. So it's going someplace. So as one of the unintended consequences, we're going to see increased code enforcement. There's another body. I mean, I'm just looking at how these impact us, how we live every day, and I think we're going to hear in the public testimony that same rationale or that same thinking. But whether it's in South Anchorage or in Mountain View or Muldoon or downtown, it's still the same problem and same concern. So I'm more interested in hearing what the unintended consequences may or may not be based on what we're seeing in actuality, what's occurring today with what has been built. Thank you.
Mr. Davis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Title 21, the current Title 21 did introduce a snow storage requirement for developments, and it is a new requirement. And I think most of the recent development that we have seen in recent years, up through probably at least 2016 and even 2017, was permitted under the old Title 21. The new Title 21, which became mandatory for incoming building permits in 2016, relatively less has been built under that. And but we recognize this as a snow storage issue, and we just like to make clear that we believe that this ordinance does not contribute or make that issue worse in particular.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, two questions. First one, a definition of the exempted area for a daylight basement. And the second question would be, when these proposed changes came about, was there a specific neighborhood or part of town that you were intending them, or requests were coming from to see the changes for?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Anderson, through the chair. The first question has to do with the definition of exempted daylight basements. So I'm trying to find the page number. Oh, okay. So on page 7 of Exhibit B, the zoning code amendments, is an existing section of Title 21 that we're amending, and it's areas not considered in floor area ratio, starting on line 10, and it lists the type of areas exempted. On line 18, there's basically some changes in language from current code. Current code reads that this floor area in stories below grade plane, period, is exempted from floor area ratio. So we use floor area ratio today, and so we've modified this floor area in a story below grade plane, and then we, in the recommended amendments, point to the definition that already exists for a story below grade plane. So, daylight basements are a story below grade plane if the floor level of the first floor above your daylight basement, if that's no more than 6 feet above grade plane, your daylight basement is a story below grade plane, so to speak, is Title 21. And Title 21, in seeing it as a story below grade plane, exempts it from FAR. I think for sloping lots, there's another aspect to that definition of story below grade plane. I think something about, if at any point the floor above it is more than 12 feet above grade plane, it's no longer an exempted basement. But it's defined there. We don't include the definition of story below grade plane in this ordinance because we're not amending it, but it's in your copy of Title 21 in 21.14.040. I forgot what your second question was, sorry.
The original neighborhoods are part of town that you're intending or looking into having this ordinance effect.
This ordinance arose from requests from builders to review the 2.5-story height limit. The 2.5-story height limit, its history is detailed on page 6 of the Exhibit A staff report. The R2 zones currently cover about 1/3 of all the urban, i.e., non-resident, non-hillside. The urban residentially zoned land in the bowl, 1/3 of it is in R2 zones. And you can see that map on page 4 of the staff report, and you can see it's scattered all about the bowl. So the the history of the R2 2.5-story height limit and height limits, it seems to go back and forth through the decades. There's an amendment to it that removes the 2.5-story height limit as it used to exist, and then there's an amendment that in the Title 20 rewrite that brings it back. Now the builders have identified this current project arises from requests by builders to consider removing that height limit, that 2.5-story height limit. Keep the 30-foot, remove the 2.5-story. So the builders were looking at sites that they're looking at building on in the near future. And now that they're under the new code, they're seeing an issue with that as they do their infill projects, what have you. The projects, a couple of the builders that we've heard from, they're building in areas like Spinard Community Council, South Addition. Those happen to be areas of where they happen to be building in. As you can see on the map, however, on page 4, you can see our 2 zones are all across the bowl. And the map on page 29, further than that, actually outlines vacant or partially vacant larger lots, but also outlines lots throughout the bowl. I think that while the builders we know they're looking at sites in those 2 neighborhoods, we also know that builders are looking sites all across the R2 zones.
Mr. Gardner?
Thank you. I have, I think, just a couple of questions, but the first one relates to the alternative equivalent compliance section. And as I'm reading this, I gather that the solar access step back is subject to that with these amendments, and then also the building articulation requirements, and then also the height of exterior stairs. Is that right? How were these the sections, I guess my first question, that were identified, or what's the process for identifying these as requirements that are subject to alternative equivalent compliance?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Gardner, through the chair. These 2 standards, the solar access step back and the R2M district-specific standards for 3-story tall buildings, they were new standards. And in particular, the solar access step back is new, very new concept. So we received comments from builders very concerned about these, that unintended consequences or builders who find more creative or alternate better means of meeting the intent of the standards, that there be some administrative, practical way of proposing an alternative means and methods of meeting the standard. And so the alternative equivalent compliance method is an administrative review, and it provides that administrative flexibility, and it can take it can take place as part of the by right, over-the-counter administrative review process. And so the builder has the ability to propose an alternative, better way to skin the cat. And I can identify and perceive instances or examples where for a solar access step back that might be the case. I won't do that to you. But there are other standards that are new, including the floor area ratio, where the builders were also concerned about the ability to have that administrative flexibility. And we found that in the case of floor area ratio, the most appropriate way to do that administratively is proposed on page 1 of the Appendix B, the actual language where administrative flexibility and floor area ratio requirement can be administrated through the minor modifications process. So we did look at the most appropriate means for each type of new standard to provide that administrative flexibility and avoid unintended consequences.
And I guess I'm not specifically familiar with that alternative equivalent compliance process, and how broadly is it used, or how much of kind of an exception does this create for these requirements?
So it's not intended to be used broadly for all types of code standards. For dimensional standards, we tend to go to the minor modifications, so that's why floor area ratio is sitting over there in minor modification. Alternative equivalent compliance is sort of like a backstop, especially for the residential design standards. And I don't know of any instances where it's actually been used. Builders are concerned about a discretionary standard, and so their preference is to try to meet, the by right standards, so when they put investment into a design, they have predictability as to whether they're going to meet the standard or not. However, in this case, we think it can be a useful way of recognizing sites where, because of differences in topography, there really isn't a need to articulate a sidewall because no one can really see the sidewall from the neighboring lot. Or in the case of the solar access step back, where they can do a quick solar access study and demonstrate, they have this better way that actually yields more solar access overall to the neighboring rooftop, but this one little part of the building pops up over, and so their design would benefit, their neighbor would benefit by proposing this alternative to the the letter of the law and the solar access step back.
Thank you. One follow-up question on that point. There was a comment, I think, in one of the more recent, I guess the E2 part of the packet, about vegetation helping kind of support an alternative equivalent compliance there with respect to the building articulation, and that was something that I had kind of wondered about as well. I think the question went to, how do we know, whose vegetation it is, or whether it's going to be there 10 years, or how is that implemented or enforced? And it looks like in the amendment here on page 2, that's indicating that these are subject to that alternative process, that it's specifically identifying vegetation there as one possibility. I'm looking at 2104.020 F2E. And I guess I was just curious if you had a sense or a response to that comment or that concern, and if I guess why it looks like it's specifically identifying an instance where that alternative equivalent compliance process would be used, why that's specifically called out here.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. The vegetation or topography were called out as examples, as they were called out to us by home builder comments on the previous draft. And those concerns seemed to be confirmed by our own site testing, as documented in the issue response, Exhibit F, Item 4E. And that 4E on page 45 of Exhibit F shows a picture of a large multi-unit development, Lusac Manor, and it shows that the south end of that development would be subject to the building facade requirement because it faces the neighboring lot. But because of a combination of topography and vegetation, the buildings really aren't visible from the neighboring lots. And so the combination of the site test and the builder concerned about these particular features screening a development, they seem to be the most likely features that would screen a development from its neighboring properties. we can, if there is a concern about the discretionary nature of this standard, where the planning director has the discretion to determine where, whether this vegetation will be there, or what vegetation it is, determine whether it will, continue to provide screening in the future. We can attempt to provide some clarification to that standard.
Okay, thanks. And then the final question I had was just, I found this Exhibit F to be incredibly helpful in kind of breaking down some of the topics that were raised in the comments and providing response to them. And I was just wondering if there were comments in the more recent round that touched on topics that weren't included in here that you had identified and maybe found useful to address specifically at this point.
The comment that you just alluded to is an example of one that is a more recent comment about the public hearing draft that had not been raised or addressed at the time of the comment issue response. So there are issues that have arisen that were not covered in Exhibit F, and staff has, we have the ability to update that to address concerns that you've heard or want us to address in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in the queue right now, I'm going to go to public hearing. We can always go back to staff either during a specific issue while it's fresh or at the conclusion of the public hearing. So I'll ask that Tom not go far. So persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission Rules of Procedure. Petitioners, including his or her representatives, 10 minutes. Representatives of groups such as community councils, 5 minutes, and individuals, 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. Our action here tonight is a recommendation to the Assembly. So after we deal with this issue either tonight or at some future night, it goes on and does not become codified until the Assembly acts upon it. I'll just give you another little tip to keep things rolling. Because there's a lot of people, we're going to kind of adhere to strict timelines, so the little green light will go on. Please state and spell your name for us. It's a big help. When the little yellow light in the middle goes on, you have 1 minute left, and when it buzzes, we're stopping. We're not going to get like an extra 30 seconds or whatever to sneak through there. So I'm watching you. As we start going, if you could just line up so if someone's at the mic, the next person would be helpful if they can kind of get somewhere close by. Jared, did you wanted it? You back in there? You good? Okay. So with that, I'd like to open the public hearing.
My name is Albert Swank, and I own 2 lots on the Park Strip between C Street and D Street, north side. We ready to go? I didn't see if the light or not.
You spell your name for us.
Okay. Albert, A-L-B-E-R-T, Swank, S-W-A-N-K.
Thanks. Go ahead. Yeah, just roll in.
Okay. Very simply, like I said, I own 2 lots side by side. They're in the middle of that block between C Street and D Street facing the Park Strip. I'm an engineer and developer. I developed hundreds of units, high-rise condos, etc., Vancouver, British Columbia. The Park Strip is R2M, and this is critical. And that half a block, basically facing the Park Strip to the alley, falls under these regulations. I'm going to be developing the half of a block from C Street to D Street, those 6 lots. I have 2. I have options on the other 4. I do not want this regulation to impose 2 lots or greater. period. In other words, single lot, no problem. It's not developable. If it is, then I will not develop. The city needs the tax base. It can stop, and I'll make one quick statement on this, and that is the density in South Addition from 1921 is when the first zoning was enacted to present has not increased. That is the most stupid thing I have ever heard of in my life. So if you want to kill the town, keep going at it, because historically that's what we've been doing, killing the downtown. There is no better area, again, than the south side of the Park Strip for a mixed-use development. And that is true of anywhere, basically, you develop. And so there's that issue. The FAR needs to be kept as high as possible, and nothing less than in reality for me to make this go 0.8. I can't do it under 0.8. The other thing is it's going to be very difficult at 30 foot. And that is the other thing that has never changed in South Addition, the height restriction from 1921 to present. So 35 foot is in reality the ideal. And I'll just throw it out there. So FAR is critical. 30 to 35 foot is critical. If it's not done, go another 20 years. You'll never meet the 2020 plan. And I can go on and on, but I think that those are the main points.
Thank you for your testimony. I didn't quite understand your point about the two-lot thing.
The two-lot, this regulation cannot affect two. In other words, I'm going to be developing in 3 phases. The center 2 lots, the 2 lots over on the east side towards C Street next, and then the north-south west side of that block. And so I do not want, in other words, if it's 2 lots or greater, this reg, as far as the solar issues, I don't want it to have effect, plain and simple.
Yeah, I guess I'm just, and we don't want to get into a real dialogue here, but I think that you've got 6 lots. Each lot's got to comply.
Yeah, but I'm not going to develop them at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm only going to develop 2 at a time. It takes a minimum of 2 lots to accomplish the development. That's the key.
I had a similar comment prior, and what I think we got at is when you're developing contiguous, you may have to go alternative equivalent compliance to sort of say, hey, this is my master site plan. Don't look at it in isolation. I eventually want to come in with all 6, but we'll leave it at that. Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
And height, but again, the height issue, even on this, is the first step. This is really the first step of a height change in the history. It's critical. That's the only way like I say, if you want development, you've got to have the height change, and you need the FAR increased. Yep. Simple as that. I mean, it's so basic.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Next up, wanting to testify, come on forward.
Good evening. My name is David Weber, W-E-B-E-R. I assume you know how to spell David. And Mr. Chairman, I have a demonstrative aid that might help in my comments if I can. I'm showing you all a photograph of a design feature on a building, kind of a quiz you can ask among yourselves. I won't presume to ask you here. What is that design feature? Roughly speaking, these are very rough figures. I'd say it's about 240 square feet of wall and maybe, call it 9 square feet of window. I don't think you should give in too very easily to the discretionary standards, because when discretion is involved, sometimes the folks over in the issuing these permits, they don't do their job. That feature is a bay window. Now, if you were talking to your mama and you described that feature as a bay window, she would laugh at you. That is one of the things under the current code that is allowed to encroach into a side yard. What's really true about that particular design feature is it is 4 bathroom sinks and approximately 8 bathroom cabinets and a window to kind of shoehorn it in under an exception to side lots. Mr. Strike, I'm the guy in my neighborhood whose ox is already gored at 1535G. So for the next 150 feet of my street, the snow removal problem, I'm well aware of it. There is no, about the width of this table is what there is for those now 3 lots to put their snow. Oddly enough, they don't put it there. They put it in front of my house. So, when I went to contracts, the best advice my professor gave me was view every contract from the point of view of a bad man and write it accordingly so that the bad man can't be bad. You should do the same thing with these regs. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
My name is John Thurber. I'm a resident of South Addition, and I want to express my gratification to the Planning Department for their deliberative and thoughtful approach to the R2 amendments. Their collaboration with the home builders has created a zoning environment that is ushering in an innovative architectural style that is now commonly known as the R2 vernacular. Some of the home builders are early adopters and have embraced the R2 vernacular even before the maximum FAR ratios have been chiseled into the Hammurabi Code. This is a prime example of the R2 vernacular. The style is easily recognized by the following features. Unique architectural style is compatible with itself. These are next door to each other, and they're totally compatible with themselves. Another unique feature is how they capture sunlight. They build these towers to capture the sunlight. The sunlight hits the towers, the heat is conducted down into the building, and that's how we get sunlight now in South Addition. Please note there's no windows on the ground floor. The driveways are the width of the lot. They don't use alleys. The pavement is a seamless pavement all the way across. No landscaping, no trees. Here's another one that was just built a couple years ago. And they're completely compatible. One of these is built on an alley. There's pavement in the back and the front. We now have $900,000 condos going in Bootleggers Cove and no sidewalks. The garbage bins are on the street. They're permanent. Here's another sun tower. This looks to me about 45 feet tall in a 2.5-story neighborhood. The current code is broken. These R2 amendments don't fix it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Anyone else wishing to testify?
Question, what was your last comment?
The R2 amendments don't fix the problems with the current code.
Thank you.
No pictures, no phone, no nothing? You're going to dance, play some music for us?
No, I'm going to be the voice of doubt. My name's Tim Feller. My last name is spelled F-E-L-L-E-R. And I'm a 30-year resident of South Addition. built my own house and have worked in many houses. So when these started to develop, I was kind of apprehensive because I took it personally, because I thought, this is really so developers can come into South Addition and build bigger houses, because quite frankly, it's cheaper to build 3 stories on a foundation than it is to build 2.5 stories. And nothing has disabused me of the fact. I think the work the staff has done is very impressive. It's a beautiful display and it's well researched. But I really oppose this because, ironically, Al, my neighbor whom I have coffee with, we completely disagree on this. Because it has been there since 1921, we have a community we've built. And this would completely, irrevocably change that community if we allow taller houses in South Addition. So I'm being very selfish here, saying I'm sure there are parts of town that would greatly benefit from this, but I do not want to see this in South Addition. Unfortunately, we don't have the option of saying we don't want this reform to the code for the rest of Anchorage, but not for South Addition. So I would have to oppose this code change, because I think it really is nothing more than a wedge to allow for cheaper, more profitable development in older communities. Sorry.
Can I just add, I mean, and you fundamentally think that looking for ways to be feasible and more affordable in building is not an objective that we ought to pursue in our codes?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. But what we have here is that South Addition has become, as you may know, South Addition's property values improved greater than any other community in Anchorage throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. For one reason, people bought homes and they renovated those homes. They made it their community. It is a community. It has sidewalks, it has older trees. So in a way, it has an historic and an aesthetic quality that many communities in Anchorage don't have. So there's a tremendous area of Anchorage that would benefit from these modifications, I'm sure, and these improvements, and building bigger, cheaper houses. No doubt that's the case. But for South Addition, which I fear is really the focus of this, because that is where the profit is, because of a community that we have built and have made desirable, it is now the object of developers' eyes. And they know that by changing the regulations, they'll be able to build cheaper, more profitable houses at our expense. So that's why I say, I wish I could say, can we exempt South Addition from this? I think most people in South Addition, Al accepted, would be very happy about this. But it puts us in a kind of a peculiar dilemma where we have to speak for all of Anchorage, which I can't do. But for my own community, no, I would not want to see this. So in answer to your question, certainly that's admirable. One does want to have better housing, but does one want to do it by sacrificing unique neighborhoods?
Great. Thanks, Tim. By the way, we don't see you as speaking for the rest of Anchorage. It was very clear you're speaking for South Addition.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Carolyn Ramsey, R-A-M-S-E-Y. I am the president of Airport Heights Community Council, and I am here speaking on the behalf of our council. In the neighborhood that's basically known as Airport Heights, we have one section that this R2 zoning and R2D affects, and that's Grandview Gardens 1 and 2. In that area, we are all mostly for single-family homes. If it is a 2-story home, it's mostly subterranean. There are a few that have been built later on. What happened last year is Airport Heights was the pilot project for the Solarize Anchorage. 33 homes put solar on their roofs. With that, and I was one of them in that area. So I have 18 panels on my roof, generating 5.3 kW possible. With that alone, our concern is we want to make sure that that solar setback or step back stays in place and is maintained. There are 4 other neighborhoods this summer going in for solar. You have South Addition, Rogers Park, Turnagain, and Spenard. This is real money to the homeowners that are investing thousands of dollars, $15,000, $16,000, somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 into being able to produce solar on their roof. For myself, just the last week of February alone was 175 kilowatts, just in February in the last week. Now, I had, I think, Planning and Zoning, I got an email that they sent all of you guys an email this afternoon. We worked in conjunction with ACEP, Anchorage Center for Power, or Alaska Center for Energy and Power, and had worked with them to produce videos that all of you got, which was best case, or the solar setback, and worst case scenario, so that you could actually see the months from January all the way through the following December on the impact that a 3-story home with a flat roof would have next to a 1-story home with a flat roof, which we have quite a few of in our neighborhood. So this is real money and real investment that we have put into our homes. And then the next question comes back, well, is there really any value to these investments? And yes, there is. If I was to go out to an appraiser today, I've got over $12,000 in appraisable value just in solar panels alone on my roof. That's real money that is looking at being taken out of our pockets that we need to care about and think about. I understand that builders want to be able to make money, but I also want and I need to see the respect back to the homeowners that have lived there and bought homes in the neighborhoods with the 1-story and the smaller homes, because they want that community. As the gentleman before us was just talking about, they have the sidewalks. It is an older community, and that's what they want to invest in. But to respect those homeowners that are there that have invested in their home to increase their property values, to not be able to just come along and take away that ability to generate power that's money out of their pockets.
Thanks, Ms. Ramsey. I have one question for you from Mr. Spinelli.
Yes, sir.
It's not just you, but the gentleman before you. Do you seem to be under the impression that this code change allows for taller buildings?
No, I understand that it doesn't allow for taller buildings. That I get, but it's the flat roof issue. And there is one home that I iffy on whether it was actually built to code and et cetera, that's about 3 doors down from me. And I see the solar impact it had on what used to be a nice little 1-story house, that after that went in, the owners moved out, they rented it, it turned into a crack house, and it was eventually taken down. And now it's an empty lot. But trying to build on that lot becomes problematic when you have this huge monstrosity next to it taking up a majority of the lot line on the north side of that lot. So whatever you build next to it, now you're going to have a huge solar impact to that home, for a possibility of either solar on their roof or the possibility of gardens and having a quality of life that next door. So that's the concern that our council has said and that we've brought forward and we've talked to multiple people about, to say, hey, this has a real value, dollar-wise effect on our homes as well.
Yeah, I understand all that. And then, are you in support of this code, or opposed to it?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Okay, I'm honest. Yes, I'm going to give you a yes and no. I am thankful to have been able to work with Tom, and he understood the information that we brought forward, working with multiple individuals, said, well, hey, wait a minute, what about the solar? And to really look at that solar step back. And I appreciate that. Would it be nice to see solar easements someday? That would be a dream. Are we ever going to get there? I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, solar setbacks are not a new concept. Are they new to Alaska? Yes. Are they new to the rest of the world? No. It's okay that we take those steps forward and think about that as we move forward. Anything else?
No, but thanks.
Thank you very much for your time.
Good evening. My name is Christian Ullman. I live in the South Addition since 1989. And I'm in support of this proposal. My problem I have is I live I have a property in 33C and block 33D. One of the issues that is a problem in South Addition is that we have, under others, two kind of zonings. One is R2M and one is R2D. R2D2. The R2M stops literally at P Street, and that's totally arbitrary. Everything south of it, actually to the west of it, is R2D, which means that even people that have a bigger lot will not be able to add on to their property In essence, many of the lots are 9,000 to 10,000 square feet and would provide for the opportunity to build a third unit on it if it's a duplex, or if it's not a duplex and a residence right now, could be replaced with a 3-unit townhouse, for example. I made a proposal to change that and was shot down because the city came back and said that apparently the area is supposed to be not strong enough to support this, and if there's an earthquake, we're all going to go out to sea and we're all doomed. So they don't want to put more people into harm's way. That was their words. The latest earthquake showed that the subdivision, the South Addition, is probably one of the safer areas here in Anchorage, and the damages that houses sustained were significantly less than in other parts of town. So I would like to ask you to reconsider the idea about extending the R2M zoning to other parts of the South Addition. Thank you.
Sir, and if I may, that's not an action that we're contemplating here tonight.
I understand
but can you
that.
explain to me why you think it's important to have that third unit?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Why do you think it's important to have that third unit on those lots?
Why is it important to have another zoning?
Yeah.
Because when you look at this South Addition and the opportunities of creating more housing, the limitations are you have some old houses that could be torn down and rebuilt with, for example, 3 townhouses if you have an R2M rating. Right now, the only way they could do it is technically build another duplex, which is not really happening very often. More likely people sell it and they put a lot of money in it and make it a residence. That's what seems to be happening. But that doesn't help the city when it comes to density, when to have more people living in the existing infrastructure that South Addition provides. So an R2M rating would indeed create the opportunity, at least, for people to expand their properties and build, advance, rebuild, whatever, but it gives another use of an additional use of the property. On that option, people west of P Street don't have that opportunity. There is no difference between one side of P Street and the other side of P Street.
I got that. Thank you. Before you leave, could you spell your last name for us, please?
My last name is Ullman. That's Ullmann.
Great. Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
My name is Marty Margeson, Margeson. I grew up in a city the size of Anchorage, where the downtown residents had moved to the suburbs. My father rescued one of the older, lovely homes and made it his office. I've lived in Anchorage since '75. I've been a resident of South Addition since '82. I purchased my current home at 1401 West 13th in '86. I chose South Addition because of large treed lots, historical interesting homes, and a large professional citizenry concerned with providing a high-quality, safe, family downtown lifestyle. With strong CCNRs and good planning, our neighborhood has been Anchorage's oldest and most successful, well-established family neighborhood. We have historically varied homes, a market with a deli hosting senior and neighbor discussion groups, a fish market, a fine neighborhood elementary school, parks, coastal trails. If we're to maintain our successful neighborhood, we need to promote quality new construction homes, not the willy-nilly inexpensive boxy multi-units, which diminish the quality of family life by blocking sunlight and view, infringing on neighbor privacy. Without private yards, these multiplexes do not attract families who need yards for pets, children, and gardens. They instead put on these futuristic elevator shafts jutting towards the sky, destroying the charm and blocking views. And I have a question about this 30-foot height because I believe that it's 30 feet high plus an additional 5 foot for these jutting elevators, which brings it to the 35 foot. I'm opposed to any height increase. Recently, my neighbor's updated, remodeled home took 6 months to sell, or a year depending on how the neighborhood statistics are manipulated. South Addition is not a hot market as it used to be. People used to line up to buy houses. But many times now, I think people look at our neighborhood and they wonder, are we really going to have a family neighborhood, or are we just going to move into a multiplex area? That's what happened when I moved to Anchorage. North of the Park Strip, that was a nice family neighborhood. Now when you go around there, the family homes are gone, they're law offices, they're multiplexes. I think the developers are sincere in wanting to make a profit. I would suggest that there's plenty of land in Ship Creek, there's land in Midtown. I don't think we need to start with South Addition and destroy a successful neighborhood.
Thank you for your testimony. Anyone else wishing to testify? Come on down.
Can I give a copy of the rest of it?
Did you submit it already? I think I heard some things that were familiar previously. Did you submit it to the planning department? It's in our packet, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Ashley List, and I live at 15th and I in South Addition. And I definitely agree Anchorage needs affordable housing, it needs more housing. But at the same time, my family is below the median household income. Our house is worth less than the median home value. And we are the people looking for affordable housing. The way you get that in Anchorage is what we did, which was rented, lived with roommates before, having kids. And then once I started thinking about having kids, bought a house that needed fixing. It's small, and we're hoping to add value to it over time, make it a more desirable place. So what we see happening with the current building codes is already it's geared more towards rewarding folks that want to come in, put in 2 units, which doesn't really add to the housing in Anchorage because so many of the existing homes have mother-in-law apartments or accessory dwelling units that provide 2 families living there already. So the new units, the benefit there is they have more space, but they don't seem to be appealing to families, partially because instead of buying, a $350,000 fixer-upper, $400,000 fixer-upper, you're looking at $500,000, $600,000 and up for a duplex. And it's just completely unaffordable for a family like mine. And the people we're seeing moving into those places are couples with no children or empty nesters who are past, that point. So we actually see it as providing less housing when you look at the number of actual people living there, because so many of the families in South Addition do have, basement apartments or garage apartments that they rent out to other people at an affordable rent. Once you're talking about knocking down a house, building new construction, the people building the houses make more money off of those, of course, but I don't see that as meeting the need. I think not just from an NIMBY perspective, but just flat out practicality, other parts of town are way more suited to providing for more housing, affordable housing, because the land's cheaper, there's more of it, and those scale developments fit better in those places. The concerns with the existing limits, I realize that the code changes that I'm not probably using the right word, planning, zoning, code, whatever you call it, the changes aren't geared towards completely resolving the existing problems. What I've heard is that the existing, when I say existing problems, I'm talking about, the elevator shafts for elevators that don't exist, and
That's it. You're right. It's a narrow code change. It's just a couple pages, so it's not an omnibus like it was a few years ago. So, but thank you for your testimony.
Hi, I'm Sarah Claydeen, Kleedehn. I live in the South Addition at 1334 G Street. I am concerned about the proposed changes Planning and Zoning is hoping to adopt. I am not opposed to development in our neighborhood. However, I am opposed to development that is not done well. I believe the proposed changes are not doing justice to our neighborhood. The South Addition has been identified as a historic neighborhood. If the changes are adopted, the character of the neighborhood will be compromised and the neighborhood will no longer feel historic. Taller homes such as condos or apartments will be built and maybe dwarf single-family homes. Homes that have sunny yards will now be shaded most of the day. Furthermore, we need sidewalks that are level, homes without tall elevator shafts that exceed 30 feet, and front yards that have curb appeal. Builders are constructing homes in our neighborhood that have extensions taller than 30 feet. They are doing it legally, but pushing the limits of legal as the regulation is written. The regulation needs to be rewritten and tightened up. Builders are constructing homes that cover the maximum space allowed and putting driveways in front of homes and completely paving yards. Driveways on the alleys are helpful and add to the character of the neighborhood. Would you want to live in a single-family house with a 30-foot building next to you that takes up the maximum amount allowed space, has parts that extend over the 30-foot allowance, blocks your sun, and has a front yard with no curb appeal? Please consider carefully these changes and leave the South Addition with its charm, its curb appeal, and historic feel. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Patrice Parker, Patrice, Parker. And we bought our home in 1991. And ever since then, I've thanked my lucky stars we live in South Addition. It has history, character, wonderful homes with mature trees and landscaped yards. And now we're being told our neighborhood needs updating. Young people need affordable housing. As one assemblyman told me, we need to realize the modern hopes and dreams of the next generation. Unfortunately, those dreams won't fit with the reality of luxury townhomes being built by real estate developers. Affordable housing for the next generation is being demolished to make way for luxury townhomes. And our homes are our biggest asset, and it's disheartening to see you guys working with the developers to turn us into another bootlegger's cove. When I walk through there, I'm shocked. I remember when it was cute and desirable. Now it's filled with these tall buildings that block the sunlight and the views. And I hope you'll listen to us and work with the homeowners and to value our hopes and dreams over those who are only in the neighborhood to make money. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't really appreciate being told that we're only working with the home builders, by the way. I mean, we're here listening to everybody. I've heard a couple of people in the development community. We have a comprehensive plan that I recommend that you all go back and look at, the way it talks about your neighborhood, but I really don't appreciate it. We got a tough job here. You're dealing with a bunch of volunteers that are here, listening to you and everybody else to deal with a number of goals. Thank you for your testimony.
I'm glad you listened to us. I'm glad you're listening, but I hope you'll work with us.
I hope that you will also work to listen to the builders that come up as well.
That was an unfortunate segue. I'm a bad man. I'm a building contractor. And Brian Harten, Harten. And through the chair, I'd like to ask, I've got some written comments that I didn't get emailed today. Can I submit them tonight? Or?
You can give them to Lori and she'll make sure they're getting in the packet.
So my comment tonight is just there's just not to dump on the work that planning has done on this document, but there's just one glaring conflict in it, and it's on page 6 of Exhibit A. They talk about removing the 2.5-story limit to increase flexibility in building design and construction. And I think that provides more housing options, and it's one of the core tenets of the 2040 land use plan. But then on page 27 of Exhibit A, they state that they're imparting the solar access step back to recreate the 2.5-story limitation. So they're giving with one hand and taking back with the other. And I think the solar access step back, this is the wrong vehicle to impart that into Anchorage code. It's been fairly silent as to that up until now. The R2 rewrite itself is overly complex. It's going to lead to misinterpretations during the plan review process. There's going to be multiple conflicts leading to delays, leading to larger expenses through the development process. It adds additional design hurdles related to the design and expense of each project through solar studies, floor area ratio, calculations and presentations. It's going to require specialized design professionals for both those items. And the goal of the rewrite is to offer protection to existing homes and underutilized properties, but it does so at the expense of maximizing potential density and meeting the goals of the 2040 land use plan for increased housing units. So I guess my simple recommendation is to go back and look at the intent of the code was to remove the 2.5-story limitation and simply do that.
Thank you. There's a question from Mr. Anderson.
Would removing the 2.5-story height limit, could you give an example of what that would allow you to do?
Well, we have, there's certain projects where we have to go below grade and do a daylight basement. And we're still allowed by code to go to 30 feet, so there's a lot more design options available to do 3 full stories above grade rather than sinking one of those stories below grade.
And does it allow you to build more units on an individual lot?
Well, the solar step back is another wrinkle that may impact that greatly. But the 2.5-story limitation, it would allow us to have more design options that would maximize the number of units, certainly, in certain lot sizes, certain configurations.
Brian, what's your preference as a builder? Keep it the way that it is, or adopt these changes?
If I had to pick right now, I'd stay right where we're at. But this started with a request from builders to get rid of the conflict between 30-story max height and 2.5-story max height.
And the reason you advocate keeping it is not necessarily that it's getting you more units. You just feel that it's simpler, or what's the primary reason?
On the face, the planning department, Tom, did a fairly intensive case study. I don't know if you have that in front of you, with 11 by 17 spreadsheet. Yep. And he took similar developments to what we've done in the past. I think he was in the 80 or 85 percentile of buildings constructed in Anchorage since 1960 or whatever it was. And essentially, my understanding is he said, these buildings will still be able to be constructed with this new regulation. So if we're not changing anything and we're making the code overly complex, it's going to lead us way more exposure to plan review conflicts and zoning conflicts. And I mean, I've seen them argue the definition of what a duplex is versus a townhome, and caused 3 weeks of delays on a project where we already had 6 duplexes built, 15 more to go.
Okay.
So this sets the stage for a lot more of that.
Thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to testify?
Eric Visser, E-R-I-C-V-I-S-S-E-R, home builder here in Anchorage. I'm also vice president of the Anchorage Home Builders Association, And just want to start off by thanking staff for the work that they did on this. It was very comprehensive. There's a lot of details that you guys worked on very hard, and it definitely shows in the presentations and the documents that we've had to review. But just for starters as well, as I support modification to the code to make it more in line with the Anchorage 2040 plan, to increase density, to allow more people the opportunity to own homes here in Anchorage. But I think what this R2 rewrite does is really overcomplex, the codes and the interpretation of the codes. We sit down at the Muni day in and day out, and we work with people across the counter, and sometimes things come up and they're not really very clear. And this document, I would say, makes things a lot less clear for us when we're, people talk about the builders this and the builders that. We build a lot of custom homes for specific clients. So it's homes that they want, it's stuff that they want to do, and we try and give them a product that they want. And this really complicates that when we can't, sit down, go over design, try and develop something that they're looking to have done and bring it to the municipality and have them shut it down for something that's not as clear as it needs to be in the code. So I recommend that you don't support this going forward, just due to the fact that it's overly complex. I don't think it solves any problems. But like I said, I do support, redevelopment of the codes to help increase density and help, homes become more affordable for other citizens.
Thanks. I got a question from Ms. Bailey.
I think one of the situations here is we're presented with something new. And so something new is confusing
Correct.
Because we have to figure out how it's implemented. But you mentioned that there were things that are just not confusing, but not that are going to be open to interpretation and going to have problems. I'm wondering what those specific things are.
I think the solar setback calculations, I think I heard Tom say earlier that he would just do a quick solar access study. I think from a builder, from my perspective, I'm a very small company, just started up a couple years ago, going to, doing a quick solar access study. I don't even know where to begin from that standpoint. So who's, if we're looking at getting this implemented in the next, 2 months to a month, for people that are going through designing homes and duplexes and stuff right now, to kind of throw this on them, say in May or June when they're just going to go in and get their permits, I think that it's going to create a lot of confusion and create a lot of extra costs for people, that it's going to be an unintended consequence of it.
I want to ask on that, Tom or Michelle, if on the notion, obviously this ordinance gets through us and then it goes on to the assembly, so we don't, but let's just assume we get through it in March and it goes on and it does go to the assembly in June or July. Do you think it would be effective midway through the building season?
No. When we originally talked about doing an effective clause, we thought we were going to be a little bit ahead of the game and before you earlier. I think that if we're in a situation that this gets effectuated or approved by the Assembly mid-July, I would support us postponing its effective clause until the following building season, so January 1 of 2020.
Eric, if you're going in for permits to start construction this summer, when would you go in for permits?
Anywhere between now and all the way up until July, August.
So it could be that late. So, yeah, I think that's it sounds like planning would reconcile, making sure that you don't have to get something midway through. It seems reasonable. Would expect someone from the commission to sort of take that up in our action. But thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Clay Porter, C-L-A-I, P-O-R-T-E-R. I'm an architect and a contractor. I've been building in this city since 1972, when it had a mere population of 100,000 people. And it has changed dramatically. I do thank the staff for the ordinance and what they've done. I thank the commission for what we're trying to do here. But this came out of a simple request to change or to deal with a height of stories and a definition. And I really think what we have now is just way too complex. I understand FARs. I understand the technicalities of this, but I don't think the public does, and I don't think the community, the construction community, particularly the residential construction community, does or will. And I fully support the problems that, or not support, understand the problems we have with interpretation at the Muni getting permits. It's an onerous process at best, and we need to work the best we can, or as much as we can, to make it simpler and easier so we can get housing built. We're underhoused. We're not meeting the goals of the 2040 plan. So I would agree with Mr. Visser, Mr. Harton, that, we should not go ahead with this ordinance. Thank you.
Mr. Porter, I have a question.
Yes.
I found the actual, on page 6 of the staff packet, the history of R2 height limits to be helpful for me to see it. And as I read it, it said that R2, R2A, and R2D zoning districts was 25 feet and 2.5 story standard until 1985. And in 85, the R2M district came into play, and that's when you had the height limit of 30 feet as long as, so there were conditions, you had to have 30% of the lot open space, et cetera. So this has been something, it seems like, has sort of gone through changes and iterations over the past 30 or 40 years.
Yes.
Can you, so then in 1999, we made 30 feet by right, and then it was through the Title 21 rewrite that we went back to the 2.5. Yeah, and you've been part of those conversations as a practicing architect all along, and sort of tracked those changes, and whether if we built neighborhoods where we really relied on 2.5 stories, and then we sort of changed them, isn't that sort of somewhat of a problem?
It creates a lack of consistency. This change is fine, change is inevitable, but the lack of consistency within the neighborhoods has created certain problems. And so now we're trying to solve some of the problems we had before, and we're trying to solve some of the problems we think that are going to occur, and then also meet the goals of the 2040 plan or whatever plan we pick. I mean, even to this day, we still haven't solved the downtown zoning in Title 21. That's still B2C.
But if we have a whole neighborhood where most of the homes were built pre-85, when you still had this 2.5 story height limit, and I think that's partly what I'm hearing from neighbors tonight, isn't that something that we, the Planning Commission, ought to consider as a balance?
Oh, I think so. I think we have to consider all of it. I think what's proposed in this ordinance is just way too complicated. I think we need to try to find a simpler and easier way to accomplish this.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Is there anyone else? Just as a curiosity, show of hands, anyone else wishing to testify here this evening? Come on up, Cheryl.
Hi, good evening. My name is Cheryl Richardson. I'm a longtime resident of South Addition. I'm here to ask you to postpone action on 30-foot heights until you resolve the issues with neighborhood character. South Addition was built long before 1985. The old part, west of C Street, south of 9th. I'm new in the neighborhood. My house was built in '64. We were built to the old 1 or 2 story standard. 1985, that's modern housing in our neighborhood. We care about our character. We've made that clear from testimony. I only have 3 minutes, I better hustle. Testimony for decades. We really care about our neighborhood. We've got some very old, cranky housing with no insulation, that's true. People are willing to buy in at very high costs and remodel those houses. I'm uncomfortable when I hear 1985 is the standard for changing. I remember those changes in height. I was busy off with other battles at that point, and I do not remember community discussion on heights the way we have had it during this debate. I'm also uncomfortable having neighborhood character advocates scolded. And I know you guys work hard, and I know you're volunteers, and so are we, frankly. And then the developers are asked for what's the timing that's best for you to increase heights to 30 feet. The excuse we've heard is that it's going to create more housing. It's going to increase density downtown, which our neighborhood is not fighting. We already are zoned for duplexes and multifamily. What our people do want, and I brought my little survey that we conducted in October of 18, what we do want is to have the houses added on to that are existing. We don't want multiplexes coming up to here. We've got 1- and 2-story homes through most of the neighborhood because we were built well before 1985. And the people are welcoming 50% welcome density, but we do not welcome heights that are going to damage our character. And character in South Addition is defined, am I pushing it, as access to sunlight, great sidewalks. You walk down the sidewalk, you see a front porch, you see a living room window, you've got a landscaped front yard, you're greeting people of different ages and different incomes along the walkway. You've got alley access through most of the old South Addition. I have a front drive, but
I got a question for you from Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Seth.
Yeah, is there specific portions of this ordinance that you are agreeable to and specific portions that are...
Truthfully, I've been so upset by this ordinance that I have not analyzed it for pieces that I agree with. If you're asking, do I agree with FAR, I think the concept may work, but I believe that we need to work with the neighborhoods to establish what will protect our neighborhood character, which is also in the comp plan. People talk about the comp plan, but they're ignoring huge portions that come to protect our neighborhood character. So right now, no. The answer is no.
I have a comment and a question. On the
Sure.
comment, since I got scolded for asking on the timing issue, it was simply where we are. We're sitting here in March, right? And I think most people would recognize if there's a change that hits right during the middle of the permit season, that we would bring with it, or planning would bring with it, a recommendation that it wouldn't split the building season in two. That's all we were saying.
I
So
appreciate
that was it.
And I could feel that as this ordinance came through, that we were hustling towards the 2019.
No, this was
construction
supposed
season.
to be in 6 months ago. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the builder,
Surely.
which was, in your opinion, do we stick with what we have, or do we pass this ordinance, which, as Mr. Davis laid out very clearly in the work session as well as in the packet, is an intent to actually address some, clearly not all, based on the testimony I've heard, some issues of neighborhood character. In your opinion, are we better off just leaving it as it is currently?
Yes, I agree. It's better to leave it as it is. And then I would ask, frankly, for staff time to come in and help us define and put into code protections for neighborhood character. Really, it's South Additions that's getting hit with this. I don't hear Airport Heights or Spenard screaming about this.
I actually heard Airport Heights here this evening
Oh,
talk
my
about
goodness.
how they wanted to keep it for solar access and solar
Oh,
protection.
good.
So there
Good.
you go.
I do know they do have solar issues.
Okay.
At any rate, you'll hear the screams coming out of South Addition as a rule, because
you.
we're getting hit. Thank you, guys.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else wish to testify here this evening? Come on forward.
Hi, my name is Michael Teo. It's spelled T-E-O. So I'm a resident of South Addition. I live in that R2M section. And I just wanted to speak briefly to how I see the impact of these larger bulk buildings affect me in my daily life. And I think that the change to allow something taller would just continue that trend. I see the reduction in sight lines when I'm out on a daily basis on dog walks. I see how the lack of snow storage on these properties gets pushed into sidewalks. It's very difficult to walk with a baby stroller and push through a snowbank that these large duplexes have pushed onto sidewalks. I see how difficult it is to execute a safe exit from an alley. I live on I Street, so I don't have street access. I only have alley access. I see how difficult it is to exit safely from my alley with large snowbanks kind of pushed into the alley by these larger developments. And I am concerned that as the codes currently stand, but also with changes, that that it just encourages these larger buildings that cause a negative impact on the residents who do enjoy walkability and do enjoy sight lines and do enjoy getting to know their neighbors. So the fact that my house is not built right up to the limits and my neighbor's house isn't built right up to the limits allows me to look outside and smile when I see my young toddler playing with the toddlers next door. That kind of community development is what is in South Addition, and I'm not sure that these larger, taller buildings enhance that. So just ask the commission to kind of keep that the resident's point in mind as they're considering this. So thank you.
Thanks. Seth, are you in there from before, or did you have a question? Okay. Thanks for your testimony. Last call for testimony on the proposed zoning change to the R2 districts. That it? Going once, going twice. The public hearing is closed. What's the wish of the body? Ms. Bailey?
I move that we break for a quick recess so we can go to the bathroom and...
Fair enough. We'll take a 5-minute recess. I can ask everyone to please take either their seats or take the conversations out to the lobby. That would be great. All right, Mr. Gardner, you're in the queue.
Just a quick question for staff to clarify my understanding of the page 4 of the amendments. And in subsection G there that refers to parapets and rooftop access enclosures that are subject to the solar access step back. Does rooftop access enclosures, is that referring to and include elevator enclosures that's listed in D?
Yes, it includes both the stairwell and elevator access enclosures.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Or I'm gonna ask for at least a motion to get us going here. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it when you put a motion. Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, in the spirit of moving this along, I make a motion in the case 2019-0009. I move in the positive to approve this, and we'll make some discussion when I get a chance.
Thank you. And does your motion include the additional edits recommended by staff on page 35 of the staff packet?
1 second. At this time, it would include staff recommendations.
And thank you. And just to be clear to staff, the Do the amendments in Exhibit B include all of those additional amendments from the back of the staff packet, or do they not incorporate those?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Exhibit B does not include those. It was released in December, and these are amendments or edits we've found needed since then.
So as we look at it, we should look at the zoning code Exhibit B as well as that page 35, which has those additional recommendations. That's how we would that's what our current motion is, to incorporate those. We need to look at those separately.
Yes, that would be.
Okay, so Mr. Anderson's motion is to approve zoning code amendment along with staff recommended edits. Can we have a second, please? Seconded by Mr. Spinelli. Mr. Anderson, would you like to speak to that or at all?
Sure. It's kind of a difficult one for me, but at this point I'm not comfortable approving this as it is. I think that based on the testimony that we've heard and review of the information, the request originally came from the building community to address a 2.5-story building height. And that community, we heard from 3 different people's testimony tonight that they weren't happy with how that turned out. The ordinance that came forward has several protections that I think are important for neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods like South Addition, to preserve character, specifically the clarification of dormers, the solar protections, and the use of floor area ratio as a flexible design tool to maintain character. But at this time, there's also some unclarity in how the 3 stories affects adjacent properties compared to the 2.5 stories. And I don't feel like we're at a point right now from either the building community or the neighborhood that's most affected, and to a point that I'm comfortable moving this forward.
I'm going to go to Ms. Bailey, but I'm going to come back to you and ask you why you feel South Addition is most affected by this ordinance later, but I'll go to Ms. Bailey first.
I think I tend to agree with Commissioner Anderson on pretty much all the points that he raised, and I think just adding on to that, one thing that I find, at this point I'm leaning towards not supporting it, but there are a lot of things in here that are worth supporting, and I think a lot of people in the neighborhood need to start looking at how a lot of these things are actually protections and asking exactly for what you want. What I heard when the neighborhood members came up here, especially from South Addition, was that you wanted to be able to preserve your light access. You wanted to be able to limit the heights of elevators and those light structures that come in, and that you want to be able to, if a big building comes in, that it takes up a smaller area of the lot so you can still have those yards. All of that was in what was proposed today. And so one thing that I'm really concerned about is that there was not clarity in that being communicated to you. And so in a lot of ways, that's why I did see this as a positive step forward, because it's providing those protections to the community in a way that the current zoning did not. It wasn't perfect, but it had a lot of improvements, and those were things that I think were overlooked. And one thing that was hard is that there was not a lot of clarity from the public comments about what specifically they didn't like. All it was that they were opposed to large buildings, but that was not necessarily what this ordinance was created. And in some ways, I think keeping the ordinance as is opens yourself up even more to large buildings next door. And so that's one area that I'm struggling with, and I'm still have additional things I want to think about first.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. I sort of posed it to Seth, but maybe I'm going to go to staff. I mean, did you point out the map on page 4, Mr. Davis, that there's a lot of zoning district, there's a lot of R2 districts sprinkled throughout the Anchorage Bowl. And did you hear feedback formally from any of the other neighborhood groups? And if so, were any sort of, positive, affirmative, neutral, negative? I mean, could you summarize sort of what we might have heard from other people during the comment period?
Yes, we reached out to community councils, a number of community councils, and the community discussion draft, we did get resolutions of support from 4 community councils, and then other community councils, not no formal comments. I'm not sure how to interpret that. The top 6 community councils, I believe, that contain the most R2 zone land include Northeast, Abbott Loop, Taku Campbell, Spenard, Turnagain, and Sand Lake. If I didn't mention 6, I've forgotten the 6th. And South Addition has about a little less than 4%. South Addition and neighborhoods like it are unique, and those neighborhoods are identified in the historic plan.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, kind of in response to your question, why I felt like South Addition, at the beginning of the discussion, I asked staff which neighborhoods were originally requested from the builders, and I think it was South Addition and Spenard were the 2 areas that the building community had the most interest in. And I know South Addition, you said, has 3.9 or 3.8% of the total R2 area, but the request was related to those areas, and the most concern was from that community council, which if we didn't hear, if I heard that it was South Addition, but I didn't hear protest from South Addition, there's a lot of R2 that could benefit from this, and I still think there's a lot of R2 that can benefit from this. But as it is, there's no protection for the neighborhood that it was requested in and the concerns that we heard from that neighborhood.
Your view is that this ordinance does not provide protection to the South Addition neighborhood?
I think that there's several parts to the ordinance that provide the protections to South Addition that I heard people voice concerns about. But there are portions of it that also do not support the things that they were mentioning.
You got an example? I mean, you've looked at lots to develop, so what are those things in your opinion? And sorry to put you on the spot, I'm just trying to figure out where we're headed here,
Well, I think that getting away from the 2.5 stories gives you a lot of protection from bulk and volume and appearance from the street. A straight up 3-story without hiding portions of the 3rd story inside of a roof line creates a lot of bulk and mass that you can't hide. And so that's one of them. I also think that, the 3rd story, I don't see how it's going to encourage more housing. I think that the number of units might likely stay the same, but the unit size might get larger just because of other development constraints on a site for parking and snow storage and paving area. And I don't see how that contributes to building neighborhood character, at least in this neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner, then Ms. Bailey.
I guess I'll start with a question for staff, and similar to the question that the chair asked about responses from the community council members, and we had identified some concerns from the building community about the relatively complicated nature of these amendments. And I guess I had been coming into this evening, I had been under the impression that that the building community generally kind of was behind this and had through the process you had gone through kind of come to understand some of these changes, but we didn't receive really any positive comments today in favor from the builders, and I was just wondering generally what the sense was that you had received through the process in that regard.
As the builders, their original request is to remove the 2.5 story height limit, and to simplify the code and just simply reduce the limit. Our review of the policies and the comprehensive plan and the impacts of the neighborhood indicated to us that this would not that would not be an appropriate change, and that there are inherent problems with the 2.5-story height limit. There are inherent problems for builders. There's some other problems. And so we were presented with this request to eliminate the 2.5-story height limit. We could not recommend deleting that height limit, but we could identify ways to resolve the problems with that 2.5-story height limit by replacing it with something better, and then including in that something better to recreate or improve upon the protections that the 2.5-story height limit provided. And we have chosen to go that route instead of deleting the 2.5-story height limit. And we've attempted to create the simplest and most flexible way to do that, to achieve those two objectives.
But I guess in terms of I don't know what the expected
I think
understanding of these amendments, and if you're anticipating
right. In the community discussion draft, which didn't include the solar access height limit, we received comments from builders and concerns, and those tended to be more towards the specifics. There didn't seem to be, complete opposition to the whole idea. That's just as we inferred it, but to instead make tweaks to it. And so the public hearing draft in large part responded to those comments that the builders had, and we felt was very responsive to those comments. There is an aspect of the replacing the 2.5-story height limit with FAR that, while FAR overall for multi-story buildings allows, limits building mass more so than current code under the 2.5-story, it does allow for that the third story, and so for part of the lot, it could allow more shadowing, and that was a big concern of 3 or 4 neighborhoods, and so the solar access protection was added with the public hearing draft, and since the introduction of that provision, we've not received any positive comments from builders about that only concern. So what the builders asked us to do about a month ago was to undertake a comprehensive test of the combined impacts of this ordinance with the rest of Title 21 and to test a multifamily development and just see what the impacts really would be. And the intent of that testing effort was to try and show us both what the impacts would be. And the intent was to be able to go over that with the builders, get their thoughts on it. We haven't had the opportunity to discuss this with them since the completion of the test. That was just last week. But I would say that the solar access protection was really demanded by a lot of the public comment, and our own review of that issue showed the need for that solar access protection, but that since that time that the builders have not The FAR was a lift for them, but the solar access protection is double the lift, and we recognize that.
Okay, thanks. And I guess I'll just say, for purposes of the furthering discussion here, I think at the moment I'm leaning towards supporting this. I recognize the concerns that have been raised, but to me it seems that the solar access step back protections are a significant part of addressing that, and those include, in addition to just the building kind of general structure itself, they also include items that would be on top of the building, including the various appurtenances that would be above, including any sort of elevator enclosure. And to my mind, that goes a long way towards addressing the concerns that are relevant and affected by this amendment here. I think some of the other concerns we've heard this evening will be addressed and subject to later proposed amendments to the code. The way I'm looking at it is, I think the biggest kind of downside in terms of the community is that because you do have that third story, as I think Commissioner Anderson maybe mentioned, it does affect kind of the sight line a little bit, the bulk that provides, but I think that's largely mitigated by the FAR change, which I think staff has done a great job of analyzing and looking at different scenarios and how that will play out. And in most cases, that provides for a smaller overall footprint than the current code would permit. And so I think that helps a lot with that bulk kind of concern and the sight lines that provides. So that's where my thinking is at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner, for that finding. I also just would echo, as people go through this, I mean, I think, our job here is not simply to vote something down or postpone it and not give any sort of guidance of where we think we go. I mean, even if the guidance is don't ever resuscitate it or whatever, I mean, I think staff would and the community would like to hear from where we are as a group and individually. So again, is it specific to one neighborhood? Do you like what it does in other neighborhoods? Do you think we ought, do we really go down that path of saying, and it's obvious, right? R2M and R2 zoning districts, the environment is not the same in all of these areas of this map. They're quite different. I mean, the character is in fact quite different. And so how do you deal with that without, really having such a balkanized zoning code that, no one can make any sense of it. So I ask, as you give kind of where you're headed, that you provide maybe direction of where you think we ought to go, or what direction we're asking for of staff, if there's additional work involved. So I have Mr. Spinelli in the queue, and then Mr. Looney.
Yeah, I don't plan to support the motion as it currently stands. And a couple things to, I guess, tell you what I'm thinking. In the solar step back section, I view the 22-foot above grade step back height limit. The way I kind of analyze that, looking at 50-foot wide lots that are typically what I have built on either in South Addition, Third Addition, or Woodland Park, I look at that as a height reduction from what's currently allowed to be a 30-foot building height to about a 27-foot building height. So I look at that as a height reduction, and I don't support that, although, I definitely heard public testimony from South Addition tonight that I think that they would be in favor of that. The next issue I kind of still bothers me is the FAR reduction. I understand, we want to promote more units on these lots, but if I live in a small South Addition home downtown, I don't think that I'm going to be happier with a bigger building just because there's 4 units rather than 2 units there. In fact, I might actually be less happy with 4 units. But So I don't support that. I think the ordinance just needs a lot of work if we were going to move it forward, and those are my two biggest concerns. And I guess I'll touch on, I guess I have one more thing to bring up that really bugs me with this ordinance, and that is that current code currently allows a 30-foot tall building that's 2.5 stories. And so in my mind, it makes no difference how many stories go inside that. If this is your big honkin' multiplex neighbor and he's 30 foot tall, does it matter if it's 2 stories, 2.5 stories, or just one 30-foot tall story? Does it really matter? I don't think it really protects your neighbor how many stories are inside that 30-foot tall building. And that's, definitely a concern that we've heard from the neighbors is that they want, a lower height building, and this just is the story thing just bothers me. So anyhow, I can't support the motion. Needs a lot of work, in my opinion.
Thank you for those 3 specific comments. That was helpful. Mr. Looney.
Actually, some of my points have just been voiced by my other commissioners, but what was just mentioned as far as the 30-foot is currently allowed. The one point I'd like to make, I guess, is according to the test analysis from Appendix A2, staff found that the actual solar access didn't have a really big impact on the model building size. It really impacted more where you put the building on the lot, essentially. So I see between that and the FAR limits that you could actually have more open space, which can be an attribute. This is a multi-layered onion here as far as there's pros and cons for each thing. I think the overall intention has been good, and I think it is confusing as far as how to apply these, but I still think that it goes in the positive direction, but it may not be ready for prime time. So I'm probably not going to support it just because I think it needs quite a bit more work on it. But I think the direction it's heading is fine. I definitely clearly heard the concerns from the communities is that just the character of the neighborhood could be impacted. Just first thing people think of is the height restrictions or the weakening of the height restrictions. But like we just heard, the height probably won't change significantly from the current code to what this is. So I think there's other aspects of this that might make more of an impact. But I'm probably going to lean on not supporting it at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. Mr. Anderson.
Just to provide a little more clarification, as far as specific items that I would look into further, Commissioner Spinelli mentioned the FAR and the difference between FAR for a single family or FAR for a multifamily. And I tend to agree that if you're trying to maintain a neighborhood character, that the FAR that you want for that, the bulk and scale that you want for that neighborhood should be fixed regardless of the type. So that would be one thing to look at. Another thing that as it applies to FAR, would be the daylight basement and the definition of being 6 feet above grade. I think that 6 feet above grade is high enough above grade to really impact the bulk and the mass of a building. So I'd like to look at that portion a little bit closer. And because this ordinance applies to a lot of neighborhoods, 90% of them which didn't have any concern with this, maybe looking at some way to identify traditional neighborhoods versus neighborhoods that might be more accommodating to some of the newer development types. And lastly, I think one of the main reasons to postpone it is I think there's some misinformation between the community and the builders, and if we were to approve this and recommend it to the assembly, I think none of those concerns or misinformation has been addressed, and I don't think we'd be doing the assembly any service passing that on without first either just making the explanation to the community or making changes that are needed to address their concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Ms. Bailey.
I think also just adding a kind of a historical note on how this came to be. It was based on the request of contractors coming in saying they didn't want this limit, and what we've heard is the contractors are saying this doesn't work. So it's not meeting, not that I'm not saying that contractors should control, I think it's a balance, but it is not meeting its intended goal that it was originally set out for. So I think there is something to be said that if you're trying to change things for a specific purpose and it's not meeting that purpose, then sometimes it's best to just either leave things the way they are or to refine them so that they can meet that purpose and meet the other considerations. But again, I think Commissioner Anderson touched on a good point, and I think Commissioner Gardner also touched on this, that I think the residents in this area need to look specifically at these regulations, and I get it's not fun. I'm a resident like you, and I'm not a contractor like some of these people up here, and it is hard for me to interpret it, but there was a lot of protections here for community members, and I think people were originally scared by the initial proposal, but they didn't see all the work that staff did to protect you as residents and your light access, and I think that that is something that you should, I think that this will be something that will be brought up again, and so I think when it does get brought up again, if it does, you should look at those specifics because they are protecting you. There's a reason that a lot of the contractors did not like this, what was happening.
Thanks, Ms. Bailey. I'm going to make a comment and then go to staff because I'm just going to tell you I'm confused on where we go from here. Right? Here's what troubles me. I heard what Ms. Bailey said, but if we came in with an ordinance that said we're just going 2.5 to 3 stories, in some weird way, I think I would have heard the exact same testimony as what I heard. Right? That's why I'm confused. I also, but according to Tom, have 4 community councils that support this ordinance because they actually do believe it, and we heard at least one from Airport Heights that actually do believe, and that was Mr. Gardner's testimony, that it actually does offer protection. And we didn't hear any builders sort of support it, which leads me to believe, and in staff's own analysis, I do believe that on balance, it probably does provide more protection to the neighborhoods. Right? I mean, I think that's a conclusion that I think we can all logically draw if you believe what Mr. Gardner said. And I do have a friend and colleague sitting over there, and I won't name her, but she at one point said maybe we got it right because everybody's a little bit unhappy still. So but that said, I think we can all see where this is headed, but I don't know what the next step really means. Does that mean when I look at a picture of this, that's really an FAR or shadowing study, but it shows this ginormous driveway, which is actually something that staff wants to fix. How do we make sure that we go from these 24-foot wide driveways on these little lots that absolutely destroys character of the neighborhood, but is a requirement, not in our code, but in our driveway policies in this weird little section at the back of the code called 2190, and that's not the builder deciding to do that, right? That's because they come in order to get that. They have to do it. And so I think you all recognize there's sort of this suite of things that we can play with, but we could also be playing with this forever and ever and not get anywhere. So I don't know. I honestly don't know how I'm going to vote, but I just ask if Mr. Davis or Ms. McNulty have any comments and any guidance to us. Would you like us to postpone? Would you like us to do something else? Is there something that you would like to simply speak? I mean, I think we get the issue, but we're not. I think I counted the votes correctly. You back in, Jared, before I go to him, or can I?
I'll wait until.
So Tom or Michelle, help us out.
Yes, we would recommend to postpone, at the very least, to postpone this ordinance to a later meeting. That would give us an opportunity as staff to discuss the results of the site test with the builders and perhaps discuss this with the neighborhood community and also to determine, based on the comments, possible ways to improve on the ordinance. It would also provide an opportunity for the department to begin bringing out some of the other amendments that we're working on, including to the driveways and other changes to Title 21 so that folks can begin to see this in context. It came out first based on a request, and so we recommend to postpone to a later meeting.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I just want to add, I do appreciate what Tom just said about the other amendments that are coming forward. The next one you'll be seeing is likely the driveway standards. We have that one teed off to start the community conversation. But at risk of pushing this so far out that we are again having this conversation abutting the 2020 building season, I would like to have somewhat of a date certain so that we're not dragging this out for another year or a long period of time.
Yeah, and I would normally do that, but I have no idea what the next step in the process is, right? So I think what we discussed earlier was that no matter what we change, that it doesn't make sense to change it halfway through a building season, right? So I know from our standpoint, we really like to know in the fall what it is that we're doing as we start teeing up developments for the following year, I mean, which is not a lot of time. So, Mr. Gardner, Ms. Bailey, Mr. Strike.
Yeah, I would just say I'm happy to support delaying this, and I think it would be helpful to continue that process of communication with the public, and to just emphasize the point as well that I think both of you just made about helping convey how these amendments relate and interact with the other amendments that you're proposing, to make that fuller picture clear, I think would also be really helpful as we go forward.
Ms. Bailey.
I'm not sure how other commissioners feel about this, but I think the staff just proposed that there are a lot of other amendments that would fix some of the problems here, and I think I would feel more comfortable moving forward with a decision on an R2 zoning if I knew what some of those other fixes were going to do, and it's hard, in one way I really wanted to vote for this because in my opinion it is getting a step in the right direction, but I'm not sure if we have all the protections and that in place to make it work when it hits the ground running, and I want to make sure that if we implement a new zoning, we're giving it the best chance to succeed, and so I think since we're already going to miss the building season anyways, maybe try to work in some of those and then address R2.
Mr. Strike.
I guess I'm a bit confused at what a postponement will end up accomplishing. If the staff goes back with and comes back with additional recommendations or changes, we're then back open to another public hearing and testimony. So that negates the fact that we had a postponement. Unless a nullification or a no vote on this particular motion has other consequences as to how you can bring that back before the commission, that would be a question to the staff.
Well, I think, if there were minor changes, then clearly a postponement means that typically you don't go through the public hearing process, the notification process, all that. I think that it's pretty safe to say that if there's anything significant that comes forward, that staff would reopen the public hearing.
Because one person's minor change is another party's.
Yeah, but we also need to at some point recognize that we have to move along, and there's a whole other public hearing at an assembly that has to happen, and all kinds of other things. So yeah, you can vote against the postponement. I think to some degree it's just a softer landing.
Yeah, I'm just looking for. That's what I'm looking for. What's the best? What positions this to move forward down the road? Postponement, a no vote, or what?
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask for a motion to postpone. I just wanted to say a couple things. One is I think, and I believe some of the builders and designers would agree with this. I believe the exercise that staff went through on testing sites was of value. I think that's something that the building and development community have been asking for a long time, because It's not until you dive into that code that you recognize, and I know people don't believe it, but it's really, really challenging to put a project together. Not just because of our regulations, but because of our costs, because of our infrastructure. You know, we hear a lot that it's developers getting really wealthy, but I actually see the others. I see the home building environment really struggling. They're an important part of our economy. Building and developing is how we implement our comprehensive plan as much as protecting neighborhoods. And if we don't have it, and we don't currently, then we're in trouble because we won't create those housing units for my kids, and I care about that. So I do think that as you go forward, looking at things and trying to understand how do you fit this stuff in with all these rules and how do you balance is an incredible exercise. And I'd put in a shameless plug for a project we have right now called Compact, a Fairview housing design, where we're trying to put 3 units on a lot, and it's an R3 lot. So it's even easier than the R2M, right, because you have lesser set. And even that is really challenging. And I think it's important for the public to understand and weigh in on the types of development that you'd like to see. We developed in South Addition. I can happily say we built 6 units in South Addition, and I can say the stuff that we backed up to wasn't real positive. It wasn't the traditional neighborhood that you all talk about. So there's not all these wonderful, there was a part of the neighborhood, honestly, that I think most of us would agree could use some positive reinvestment. So let's, I think, try to hear that on balance. At this point, I'd accept the motion to postpone. Who wants to do it? Mr. Strike, is there a second? Because I heard a little disagreement. Could you please vote on that motion? And we're going to postpone it indefinitely simply because we don't know what the next step is. This case is postponed. I know there's probably going to be some conversation. We have one more order of business, so just ask that you either stay quiet or carry on conversations out in the lobby. So next up, and this is an absolutely appropriate time to do this for me, I think. We have annual election of officers. Remind me, Lori, we can either do that one at a time or we can introduce let's see, you want to do it one at a time? Okay. Mr. Strike.
Yes, I have 2 motions then. I have a motion to nominate for the chair position the current co-chair, Danielle Bailey.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Gardner. Ms. Bailey, that okay by you? No.
I reluctantly accept.
Well, there you go. Hey, thank you. Before I call the no, okay.
If I vote no, it can still pass.
Yeah, it can still pass. You're stuck now.
You should. You should vote no.
Vote no. And I'm just going to say that I'm very thrilled to say, and nobody else knows this, but as a University of Minnesota Humphrey grad as chair, I get to pass the gavel to another University of Minnesota Humphrey grad. So put that in the school paper. Okay, if there is such a thing. Next motion.
Next motion. You have to acknowledge.
Go ahead, Mr. Strike.
Yes, I would.
I thought I'm no longer chair.
For co-chair, Commissioner Brian Looney.
Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Bailey. Mr. Looney, that okay by you?
What Ms. Bailey said, but I'll probably be voting against it. But I'll accept the challenge.
You are wonderful public servants and well deserving of your new roles. Thank you. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
I got one more request.
Okay.
I'd like to go on the record that the method to ensure one doesn't get nominated for chair or co-chair is to ensure that you're the first one to nominate.
That's right. That's right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Oh, is it on there already? This meeting is adjourned.
So I will say that I'm definitely,